the way you will see this again on Thursday. I keep thinking today is Thursday because we normally have our last day of class on Thursday. I'm still wrapping my mind around that. But essentially what you'll see on the exam is a table in which I will have the hormone. I will give you that. And then I want to know the source, so what organ synthesizes the hormone. All right. And then the effect, up or down, on blood levels of amino acids, fats, which are fatty acids, and glucose. Okay? So we started out with insulin, so that's kind of, it's not the very first hormone, unfortunately, in your lecture notes. But if you flip towards page 78. So remember, as glucose levels are elevated in our absorptive state, insulin is going to be released. All right? This could also be increased not just with glucose levels, but with the vagus nerve, because that's all part of our absorption digestion. And so insulin is produced by what organ? Pancreas. It is only one of two hormones that we will cover that functions in the decrease of glucose. So here, what insulin is going to do is increase glucose take up by cells, all right? Increase the synthesis, so the storage of lipids as fat, and increase the use of proteins. So as we're doing all of that, what effect would you expect that would have on blood levels of each of those? Decrease. So if we're increasing the use of glucose, it's going to take glucose out of the blood. If we're increasing the storage of fat, fatty acid levels are going to fall. And if we're increasing protein synthesis, then amino acids are going to fall as well. Okay? So each of these levels is going to decrease as it increases the body's use of those components. So glucose is removed for a fuel source. Fatty acids are used up as the cell stores fats. And amino acids are used up as new proteins are being made. All right. Then we get to the post-absorptive stage, where these levels are low in the body. And glucagon then is going to be released from the pancreas. It doesn't have much of effect on protein synthesis or breakdown, so we'll just leave that a blank. But it's going to do the opposite. It's going to add more fuel to the body by releasing fatty acids from fat cells. So it's going to increase the activity of lipase actually in the adipocytes. And it's going to cause the liver to do glycogenolysis and release additional glucose from the liver. So breaking down glycogen. So remember, these are hormones that have to do with glycogenesis and glycogenolysis. Not the gluconeogenesis, all right, that we'll see with our other hormones. So someone who is hypoglycemic is more likely to have a problem with insulin or glucagon. Someone who is hypoglycemic. Glucagon. So they're going to have an insufficient level of glucagon. Someone who has insufficient amount of insulin is going to have high levels of blood sugar or be hyperglycemic. All right, so switch back again now. We're going to go to growth hormone on page 74. And growth hormone has receptors on many cells, but it also activates the liver to release growth factors. So it's not a direct one-to-one relationship, and if we had more time, we would talk about those growth factors as well. But this is very similar to the anabolic steroids, which you guys didn't get the case study on, but we'll cover it here. And what it does, it's a gluconeogenic hormone. So it shifts the body's use from glucose to fats. All right? It's a great weight loss drug if we could just figure out how to use it properly, because it will function to increase protein mass. So instead of using glucose, we break down our fats, but we maintain the muscle mass of our body, unlike cortisol or epinephrine. So growth hormone is made by the anterior pituitary, and since it maintains or increases muscle mass, it's going to have those cells, the muscle cells, are going to be taking amino acid out of the blood to make more protein. So we're going to see a decrease in amino acids. Since we're not using glucose, glucose levels in the blood go up. All right, we're shifting to, not so much because we're breaking down glycogen, which glucagon does, but because we're just not using it. Okay, we're not shifting our sensitivity to it, and instead we're using fats. So adipocytes are breaking down their stored fat and releasing fatty acids into the blood, and so we see an increase in fatty acids. So again, think of a little story or make up a little troll in your brain or something like that to figure this out, because it's better than memorizing this chart if you understand what's going on. All right, so again, growth hormone causes more muscle mass to be built. So we're using up the amino acids in our blood. And it causes fat cells to release fat. So it's the best weight loss drug out there, because you maintain your muscle mass and you lose fat. The only problem is, what do you think is going to happen to insulin with those constant levels of elevated glucose?
Right.
It's going to cause increased insulin secretion. And so in the case study with our bodybuilder, Tyrone develops diabetes type 2 because his pancreas just gets worn out producing elevated levels of glucose, of insulin, to try to maintain normal levels of glucose. All right? So that would be a downside to trying to use growth hormone as a weight loss drug. Thyroid hormone, or thyroxine, functions to increase the metabolic rate. And it does so by activating the mitochondrial enzymes to make more ATP. So as you make more ATP, what are you going to need more of? Glucose. Okay? So thyroid, because of that, thyroid is the only other hormone besides insulin to lower levels of glucose. It doesn't have an effect on protein, but it also is a gluconeogenic drug because it increases the use of fatty acids for energy. Thyroid hormone, I hope nobody misses where it's made. So again, it doesn't have much effect on amino acids. It's going to elevate fatty acids, and it's going to lower glucose. Remember, insulin lowers everything. Okay? Thyroid just lowers glucose, but it adds fatty acids to the source of fuel. Now here's the adrenal gland, and the last two hormones are from the adrenal gland, but from two different parts of the adrenal gland. They're both released under stress. Here's an image of the adrenal gland, the medulla, and the adrenal cortex. Right? The medulla, remember, is really nerve cells. that don't look like nerve cells, but they are developed embryologically as the postganglionic sympathetic neurons. And so they release epinephrine, okay, which is very similar to norepinephrine. In the adrenal medulla, we have 3 regions. And if you were to look closely, you'd see a lot of smooth ER in all of these cells because the hormones they make are all steroids. So the sex hormones are male, they're androgens, they're forms of testosterone, all right? Aldosterone we already talked about in the urinary system as affecting sodium reabsorption. So here we're talking about glucocorticoids, and the major one is cortisol, right? So you may have seen the ads for various women who, put on weight, they call it belly fat and all of that kind of stuff. And they have the ad about this couple that we both went on a diet, went to the gym, and he lost weight and his shorts fall off. And she said, I just lost weight here, and she points to her breast, and the rest of her is still overweight. And so that has to do with a lot of the effects of how sex hormones, with both male and female, but especially estrogens, as you get older, estrogen, insulin-resistant molecules all seem to work hand in hand. So one of the symptoms of polycystic ovarian disease is difficulty in losing weight, insulin resistance, so the sensitivity to hyperglycemic foods, and so there's this compounding of hormonal changes that makes women's nutrition so complicated. If I were to go back and get another doctorate, that's what it would be in, is in hormones and food processing. It's just this big mystery that not very many people seem to understand, not so much understand. They're isolated in one particular area, so they do research on this hormone, and you see very little overlapping of how that's affected by other hormones or other age changes or something of that nature, okay? Kind of like studying embryology and looking only at the heart and not recognizing that at the same time the stomach is doing something and the brain is doing something. In the embryology class, does it system by system and seldom age by age. So cortisol is a major stress hormone. It decreases inflammation, all right? Adrenal gland, anything is missed on this table, on the exam, it's what organ produces cortisol or epinephrine, okay? And that's the adrenal gland. The effect, remember the Cushing syndrome? We didn't have, I don't think anybody in this lab did the case study with hyperprolactinemia, but a tumor in which too much cortisol is produced, either a pituitary tumor of ACTH or an adrenal tumor with too much cortisol, produces a disease known as Cushing syndrome. And the major symptoms, sometimes so major that doctors miss it because not everybody shows up with these symptoms, is a moon face, kind of the prednisone effect of steroids, a buffalo hump of adipose tissue at the base of the neck, a distended abdomen with rapid weight gain. You see these striae, all right, sometimes a dark purple color. But what's not shown in this image is muscle wasting. Very skinny arms and legs. Often weakness, bending down and not be able to stand back up again is an early sign of Cushing's. All right, so we certainly have the gluconeogenesis. So we're not using glucose for fuel. That is saved. So there is an increased levels of glucose in the blood. Fat is broken, fatty acids and proteins are both elevated as well. So proteins are elevated, why? Not why, but as a factor of this, what we see is an increase in amino acids because the proteins are actually broken down and fats are broken down. So this is kind of the opposite of insulin, where all the levels were decreased. With cortisol, everything is increased. Amino acids, because proteins are broken down, hence the skinny arms and legs and weakness. Fats are broken down, also except for the belly area, but glucose is not used. All right, so everything goes up. This is your typical gluconeogenic hormone. The release of amino acids and lipids for fuel, and not the use of glucose. So because of that, everything goes up. And then finally, norepinephrine, which is similar, except that it doesn't affect proteins again. And so we just see an increase in fatty acids and glucose. So epinephrine. So I remember when I was in high school, you know those high school crushes. I think that this guy that talked to me the day before was looking at me during geometry class. So I'd lose 3 pounds before Friday. I didn't even have to go running. Aww. But then later on, stress seems to make it's impossible to lose weight. Okay? So there's an age change with that. All right, so that's what I want you to know. My last official lecture, concept, word, officially. Now, again, it'll be tempting to just memorize the ups and downs or put them in some order that's easy to remember, but this will stick with you longer if you think about why, okay? For the purpose of additional fuel or purpose of making or breaking down proteins. All right, so this is just a day of bad news, all right? Last day of lecture material, last lab quiz. Your lab quiz is open mouth, okay? You can talk to each other, you can answer back. You just can't read your book or listen to my mouth on a recorder or something. You can talk to me, but I won't answer back, okay? So the lab quiz is all histology, naming the structures, and you can talk to each other. It's just one question, not multiple A, B's, and C's, okay? And so you can confer with each other on what you're looking at. Yes?
Will the histology focus on identifying individual organs or identifying individual layers? Such as,
Either or. You might have name this cell, or name this gland, or something like that. Okay? Well, there's 20 people in here. You could, you guys are in the stomach, you guys are in the liver. You have about 15 minutes, okay? So not a